So I want to give you some background on food packaging materials. And to start us off, why are we talking about this? I guess we all know. We're all concerned about the impacts of plastic pollution on the environment. This is the problem that we want to solve. We also want to solve chemicals leaching into food, making us sick, which was very drastically illustrated by Pete. Thank you for that. And to understand what we're dealing with, we need to take a look at the history of food packaging. And the history of food packaging is very, very closely linked to the history of human culture. Our hunters and gatherers 10,000s of years ago, they didn't need food packaging. They were nomads. They traveled where their food went. They traveled with the seasons. Fast forward, Neolithic Revolution, people started farming. People settled. People needed to store food across winter, for example. They had very simple containers made of ceramics or clay, probably. Then the Egyptians started to champion glass making. This is thousands of years ago, right? We're talking about thousands and thousands of years ago. Paper also was invented and used as food packaging. But that was pretty much it for a long, long, long time. Again, big jump forward. We're crossing through the Middle Ages and so on. We're going to the industrialization. And this is where this man, Nicolas Appert, Frenchman, becomes important because he's probably the one who invented food packaging, at least the way we know it today. He started putting food into glass jars, closing them, heating them up, and by doing that, he sterilized the food inside. He made it storable for a long period of time. He also worked with metal, and there's a couple of stories out there. If you're a fan of food packaging after this event, I invite you to read about Napoleon, for example, or the crossing of, who was that captain? John Franklin, exactly. There's a lot of interesting stories on this. And the sort of kind of beginnings of commercial food packaging. This is late 19th century, starting in Britain, but then also in the UK. Biscuits. It started with biscuits. People used to buy biscuits that were sort of lying openly, and they'd put them in paper bags and consume them quite rapidly. But after a while, that gets soggy. And so biscuit packaging prevented them from sucking up moisture and kept the biscuits nice and crisp and crunchy. And so that's how it kind of started. And now the rest is history. If you go to any modern-day supermarket across the world, you see these beautiful shelves full of colorful packaging. And that's what we're dealing with today. And we've got a big display over there. Go have a look at it, touch and feel the packaging. Importantly, when we talk about food packaging today, we have to understand what the function is of food packaging. And there's many different functions. The sort of basic ones were to enable storage of food, to keep the pests out, and to prevent spoilage. That's what Appert was dealing with mostly. And then it got more sophisticated. Then it was about keeping oxygen out, keeping moisture out, keeping sunlight out, because all of those factors can change the food, the quality of the food, change the flavor of the food. It was about keeping the fizz in. So you'll often hear people say Coca-Cola tastes better from a glass bottle. Well, that's because the CO2, which is the fizz, doesn't get through glass. Glass is a complete barrier for that. Whereas with plastic, it gets out. So that's it. It affects the flavor. It's the packaging that affects the flavor. And it's also about advertising your product, of course. We know the iconic shapes of Coke again. Modern-day packaging is much more complex than that. You have these very, very complex supply chains. You have logistics, transportation. You have high-throughput, automated filling of the food. And the packaging has to work in those systems. The food packaging we see today are basically the enabler of retail. The supermarkets don't work with without food packaging. So it's a very complicated mesh of requirements and properties that play together when food packaging is designed. But it's also more than that. It's convenience. We've kind of become nomads again, right? We're always on the go. We're running from A to B, and we grab food, and we take it along and chuck the packaging and so on. So, yeah, we're kind of back to that hunter-gatherer stage, but it's the supermarkets that are providing the bounty of nutrition to us, not nature anymore. And I think this is also an important one. It's about enabling experience. Food packaging is not just about, storing, preserving food nowadays. It's an experience that you have with your food. You open it, it goes, that's all part of the experience. So I understand very little of that. I'm a scientist, but that's what the marketing people say. And that's why I think that's one of the big barriers for change, actually, because packaging is such a big part of the product. It's not just storing food. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some terms. You've heard most of these already. I just want to clarify. So we talk a lot about food contact materials, but when we talk about food packaging, what we're actually talking about is the food contact article. And it's confusing because people use these terms, they interchange them, but let's try and be precise. And let's say material when we mean material, and article when we mean food packaging, the finished packaging item. And that's because the food contact article consists of many different materials here, and those again consist of what we call food contact chemicals. So that's a term that we made up, actually, to simplify the discussion. It's not a legal term. Just be aware of that. And it includes any and all kinds of materials that are present in food packaging in the finished article, regardless of whether they're intentionally used or non-intentionally used. We know that there are many different kinds of food contact materials. This is from Europe in the European regulation. 17 different types are defined. So plastics, paper and board, glass, metal. But there's also funky things like active and intelligent materials, wood, cork, printing inks, adhesives, ion exchange resins, silicones, and the coatings, and so on. So later on, when you look at the packaging, try and figure out how many different materials are in what you just call a plastic bottle, for example, or a paper bag. It's always more than one. Okay, so we're going to talk about packaging types here today. And so these are the 5 major types of packaging that we're going to talk about. We've got plastics, we've got paper and board, we've got metal, we've got glass, and then we've got what we call the multi-layer, multi-materials, also known as beverage cartons or Tetra Pak. Let me just get my props here. Okay, I thought that would roll. It doesn't. So this is this multi-layer, multi-material. Can you assist me, please, Maricel? Can you assist me, please, and grab me those from back there? Thanks. This is completely improvised. And I've got 3 minutes. Oh, my goodness. So here I just put together, you can have the slides later, what these different food types consist of mostly. Importantly, thank you. There's, metal. You have mostly coatings on the metals. So if you look at thanks. If you look at these cans, you see there's a white coating on the inside. That's not metal. That's a coating. That's synthetic chemicals. Then, oh yeah, good. Let's do it like that. Then I'll have the glass. Yeah, the glass, please. Thank you. Glass. And then it's got the metal closure, and that inside also has different materials, coating and plastic. And then, what else do we have? Thanks. And then paper and board, of course, with the printing inks. Thank you. And a plastic bottle with the label, adhesives, and so on. Yeah. No, yeah, it's just great, thanks. Okay, so a quick word on the barrier properties for plastics. And, full disclaimer, I'm talking about barriers to oxygen, moisture, sunlight, and so on. There's a different context in which we talk about barriers, but I guess Marisa will talk about that more later. Barriers to migration. So They're very good for metal and glass. Multi-layer materials, they often have an aluminum layer on the inside, and then that's also a good barrier for oxygen and moisture, so it enables fairly long storage time. But the direct food contact layer in these is plastic. Okay, quick word on recycling, 1 minute. Okay. We distinguish between permanent and non-permanent materials. Quick show of hands. Who's heard of the term permanent material? Okay, not many. Okay, so let me just go into that for a second. Permanent material is one for which the inherent properties do not change during use and regardless of repeated recycling into new products. Its recycling does not necessarily require the addition of primary material or additives to enable the basic material functional properties. Metal and glass, permanent materials, others not. I was going to talk about material properties of these different packaging types. So who knows what organic chemistry is? Quick show of hands. Okay, most people. Good. I don't need to explain that. End-of-life use. You can look at this later on. It's basically linked to the permanency. Don't confuse permanency with persistence in the environment. Two different things. That's important. And we've got a paper on the chemical pollutants in recycled food packaging. You can look at it over there. And so I'm getting to my takeaways. Food packaging is a symbol of human culture and a symptom of how society produces and consumes food. It's very important. You can't talk about food packaging and solving plastic pollution without addressing this. Food production and consumption is really the key to this. Food packaging requirements are diverse and they depend on the specific product. So there's not going to be one solution fits all. And there are 5, well, I explained that. This is the last, or the before last slide I want to show. This is where we're at right now, our human cultural evolution. But in order to fix that, we have to move from the trash bin, which is our linear economy, to the circular economy. And recycling is just an intermediate. And that's really, really my takeaway here. We have to get smarter at not producing any waste at all. Okay, sorry I went over time. Thank you.